with their natural order, with natural law.
If there's one characteristic trait of the gay agenda in the public school system, it's this: it's sneaky.
Has to understand barbarians need to be educated.
We went from Lawrence versus Texas to now
The reason that
constitutional right
was
to same-sex marriage, and they're going into
Since the beginning of time, we have been using labels. Labels that define our race, religion, beliefs, and even our life choices. But many of those labels that were used to discriminate each other have been accepted by the majority. But one label of discrimination still stands: the label of sexuality. Thankfully, we are getting more comfortable with the LGBTQ+ community, a lot more than ever before. The fight for LGBTQ+ rights started somehow, and that somehow was the Stonewall Riots. In 1969, police raids on gay bars occurred regularly. Tommy Schmidt was 21 years old at that time and was a regular at Stonewall Inn.
The other bars, if you danced a slow dance with someone, they would curse you out, treat you very badly. And since the Stonewall had 2 good jukeboxes in there, and since you could dance slow, because slow dancing back then was a big thing, for me, I think that was the main reason why people liked it so much, because you felt like a human being for the first time in your life.
Gay bars in New York were raided constantly. In fact, the Stonewall had been raided just 4 days before, but somehow the early hours of June 28, 1969 were determined to be different. Deputy Inspector Pine was in charge of the raids that night, and he was the police officer that had led them. And he said,
"All it ever took before was going in and saying the place is being raided, everybody out, and have your IDs, ready at the door, and they would show you something. You'd let them walk out, except the transvestites. I mean, those you took that night, for some particular reason, they resisted."
Author David Carter says,
"But that night they were like, 'Don't touch me, get your hands off me.' A lot of the bar patrons were giving lip. Otherwise, it went initially pretty normally."
At 1:20 in the morning on Saturday, June 28, 1969, 8 police officers arrived at the Stonewall Inn. Approximately 200 people were in the bar that night. The police decided to take everyone present to the police station, but the patrol wagons had not yet arrived, so patrons were required to wait in line for about 15 minutes. Those who were not arrested were released from the front door, but they did not leave quickly as usual. Instead, they stopped outside and a crowd began to grow and watch. Howard Smith was a reporter for Village Voice, which was only a few doors down from Stonewall. His office overlooked Christopher Street.
Suddenly I saw 25, 30 people at first. It looked like it from in front of the Stonewall. I couldn't tell yet. And I went back to trying to write, looked again, and suddenly there were 50 or 100 people, so I put on my press card and raced downstairs.
After the crowd had grown very large in size and included people from around Greenwich Village and Stonewall, something had to take place.
The turning point really came when a lesbian was being escorted from the bar by the cops, fighting them on the way out. And she was thrown into a police car, got out, and tried to fight her way back inside the Stonewall Inn. This happened 2 more times, and she ended up being rather brutalized by the police there, hit in the head with a billy club. And it was her anger that really set the crowd on fire.
That was the last straw.
They were screaming, they were throwing bottles, and they were throwing coins. And that's where this guy flipped his coin and got him in the eye. It was just a horde of people out there. There were some vehicles out there, and the people were on top of them.
The police then were outnumbered by 600 people.
And at that point, Deputy Inspector Pine said, "We're going to barricade ourselves inside. It's gotten too dangerous until reinforcements come."
Quote, "I had been in combat situations, but there was never any time that I felt more scared than then," unquote, Detective Pine had said. By 4 in the morning, the streets had been cleared. 13 people had been arrested. Some in the crowd were hospitalized, and 4 police officers were injured. Almost everything in the Stonewall Inn was broken. Payphones, toilets, mirrors, jukeboxes, and windows were all smashed, possibly in the riot and possibly by the police. But this was not the end. The crowd, which was made up of all shades of the LGBTQ+ community, flocked to take part in this revolutionary act of defiance. News of the riots spread quickly throughout Greenwich Village, and the next night, rioting again surrounded Christopher Street. But this time, the people were in thousands.
We could see this crowd, humongous, angry. We saw people lighting things.
Although the police, backed up by the Tactical Patrol Force, tried several times to break up the crowd, they were outwitted by rioters who would simply disperse, regroup, and attack from a different direction.
Suddenly, like an army in front of us. You'd push 3 people here, and 5 people would come around the side of them. You know, they were mad that night.
And then it was like a dam burst of anger. And I think it was not just the anger of that night, it was the anger of all the humiliations over the years from various city administrations. And, slights of all kind reached a boiling point.
Many people say that the riots were not important because there were protests such as sit-ins before the Stonewall Riots, and the Stonewall Riots were just another act of rebellion. But I disagree. The first reason is that the Stonewall Inn sheltered homeless youths with only a fee of $3. In return, they were giving drinks and a place where they could be all night. So it was not just a place for people to get drunk and party, it was also a home. My second reason is that many other protests before and after the Stonewall Riots broke only a couple of rules, but Stonewall broke many. For example, during police raids, women had to be wearing, quote, 3 pieces of female clothing, unquote, to prove they were not in drag. Many participants ignored the rules and regulations. Instead, they fought for equality. Finally, my last reason is because of the Stonewall Riots. For the first time in the history of gay rights movement, it wasn't solely gays, or lesbians, or bisexual, or transgender people participating. It was all of them, together, united under one single goal and desire, to gain equality. Many people also argue that the Stonewall Riots were too violent, but to them I say, if the riots hadn't been violent, oppression would still exist, like it did before the Stonewall Riots. In 1969, the Stonewall Inn was constantly being raided just because of the patron's sexuality. So the LGBTQ+ community took a stand and protested 6 days around Greenwich. This resulted in an event that went down in history. Even though the Stonewall Riots caused the major boost we needed in our society, we are not done yet. Even today, only 23 countries out of 193 countries in the world allow gay marriage. Even today, hate and negativity is given to people that give nothing but love. Even today, we can't realize we're all equal and we're all in this together. But instead of arguing, I would just like to say a statement from Martin Luther King Jr. Quote, "Freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed," unquote.
The reason we all came to Washington for this week, the march. As you can see behind...
We cannot stand down. We cannot watch the negativity. We can raise awareness and fight for what is right. We can finish what the Stonewall Riots began. Quote, "People are beginning to realize that no matter how Nelly or how femme a homosexual is, you can only push them so far," unquote, the doorman of the Stonewall Inn observed a few days after the riot. For now, the Stonewall Riots are a beginning without an end. An end we have to find.